much for the narrative, huh? Like, I just got done watching some video from some guy who pretended to be some like financial advisor that specialized in Asian companies. And he specifically said that the Switch 2 was not selling well in the US. And yeah, spoiler alert, he was wrong. And this has been a pervasive claim from these kind of people for the past year. And now we can safely say that it is not true. So, for those of you who aren't aware of what happened, sales for PlayStation and Xbox tanked over the 2025 holiday season. And because the Switch 2 was the brand new hot console, the narrative became that the Switch 2 failed this holiday because console sales across the board were trashing. When in reality, it was because of the ever increasing failure of PlayStation and Xbox. And this fact has become a little bit more solidified as 2026 has gone on because we saw like Nintendo Switch 2 games do very, very well throughout January, February, and especially March. And now we're in April. We're getting, huge games like Pokemon Pokepia and Tamagotchi Life. We're getting like major releases every month, I think, for the rest of the year. And now things are picking up again. Okay, financial analysts want to tell you that like, oh man, it didn't consoles didn't do well in January and February. Like, wow, the slowest month of the year because everybody got consoles before the holiday season. Like, this isn't complicated, bro. Like, this isn't something to like. This isn't rocket science. Okay, it's pretty obvious what happened when you were actually there and you were actually paying attention. The Switch 2 was doing well, it was moving units, it was selling games, but the industry was bending over backwards to try and gaslight you into thinking that like Nintendo Switch 2 was too expensive, that the games were bad, that like nobody liked Mario Kart. They were bending over backwards to try and do everything they possibly could to keep the narrative regarding Switch 2 negative. And eventually, by the time Pokemon Pokepia came out, it just completely imploded. And now we're kind of past the point where we can pretend that like the Switch 2 has no games. Okay, the Switch 2 had more exclusive titles day one than PS5 is going to have in its entire lifespan. Okay, like that's just the reality of the situation we're in now. Okay, the Switch 2 is doing well. The games are selling well. Like, there have been no notable failures. Like, everything they've been putting out is an evergreen title. Okay, Mario Tennis Fever did not bomb. Okay, we got to get that out of the way. Prime 4 did not bomb. Air Riders did not bomb. Like, Legends EA was a ludicrous success. People forget when people were trying to say that game did badly. And now we have to move on to the next thing. Okay, what are the masses gonna do next? And I imagine what they're gonna do is that they're gonna endlessly glaze, Grand Theft Auto 6. They're gonna hype that up. They're gonna make it seem like it's a huge deal breaker if Switch 2 doesn't get Grand Theft Auto 6. They're gonna bend over backwards. They're gonna do everything they possibly can to downplay and ignore Nintendo. They're gonna hype up shit like Mixtape and like Forza Horizon 6 to try and create the illusion that like Pokemon Pokepia is not the most beloved title to release this year so far. Like, they're doing all sorts of things, but like it seems like in the immediate future there's not really much they can do because Nintendo whipped Star Fox out of their ass. And it looks fantastic. People are hyped for it. It's probably going to be the best-selling game in the series. And we saw game journos, bend over backwards to try and downplay Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. I produced a video about this already. They tried to shit talk Yoshi. They tried to downplay this. They said it would be like this huge failure and that nobody cared for it, that nobody wanted to play it. And like the reality was quite a bit different, honestly. Like, the reality was that Nintendo Mysterious Book is coasting off the success of the Super Mario Galaxy movie. It's a Yoshi game from Good Feel, and it's on a console that that has a lot of people looking for big new Nintendo games. So like Mysterious Book, I think, is gonna be like quite successful. Like, I'm sure it'll outperform Woolly World for sure. I'm just not sure if it'll like outdo like Crafted World, which did quite a bit better, or like the big boys of like Yoshi's Island DS or the original Super Nintendo one. Like, these games do fairly well for themselves. So I'm not like worried or apprehensive about Mysterious Book, but like the narrative has always been that like Nintendo is struggling right now. And one of the things I found interesting in that like financial briefing I watched was that like he's like this old like boomer, like he looks like a snake oil salesman. He's like he tries to do this thing where he's like, yeah, these are the worst numbers that you could possibly have if we're not in a recession. And I'm just like, bro, we are in a recession. Like the economy is failing. Like everything is getting more expensive. Like I don't understand why this isn't like a major talking point, right? If the economy is crap, if people are buying less things, then obviously everyone's going to be struggling. Like it's not a problem that's exclusive to Nintendo. Is like my mindset on this. Like it's not a problem that Nintendo alone is going to have. It's like the weird like massive double standard when it comes to like these financial analysts. Like whenever they talk about the stock price, like they keep insisting that like Nintendo's going to fail, that the Switch 2 isn't doing well, that it's slowed down, that like the stock is collapsing, that like everyone's angry at them and like the reality is quite a bit different. Like to me it feels like an astroturfing campaign where you just have a bunch of people who have a financial incentive in seeing Nintendo fail, and they're just doing everything they possibly can to like throw everything they have at the wall to like try and like diminish this company's success. Like they're doing everything they possibly can to say that they're going out of business or that they're struggling or that they're going to have to like severely raise prices or that they're going to have to do this or that. And like the simple reality is that like what you're going to see going forward is that like Nintendo is going to succeed. Like they already have succeeded. And the industry is just very, very, very desperate to maintain this illusion that Nintendo is like actually on the verge of like dropping out of the console space entirely. And like I just don't know why they're so determined to see this happen. Like it's very much like a self fulfilling prophecy in a way where like the industry is just like insisting that Nintendo fail, that Nintendo not succeed, that Nintendo got out of business, that the Switch 2 not do well. And like people believed it, like I think at first, but like over the past year of seeing people bitch about the stock price and seeing like the reality of what that means, where like, it just goes back up or it stabilizes. It's not a big deal at all. Like the idea that the stock market is somehow going to stop us from getting good games or it is just laughably stupid. Like it's just not going to result in anything like negative at all. Like the real reason I think the stock market thing is an issue is because Nintendo's not listening to the investors. They're not prioritizing them and because of the way they're set up, like they don't have to. Okay? And I think that's the real reason why so many of these financial analysts are like so uppity about Nintendo and why they're so pissed is that they're an entertainment company that they don't really have any control over. And that's kind of how we're seeing like Nintendo constantly just put out banger after banger after banger while like everybody else just falls apart. And that's the interesting thing about this is that like we were told that Nintendo specifically was failing, but what we weren't told was like, how many other companies have we seen shut down? Okay, how many other gaming controversies have we seen? Like, what has PlayStation done over the past 5 years? What has Xbox done? Like, what are these companies doing that are going to keep them relevant in the near future? Like, they have more expensive hardware than Nintendo. They don't have as many games. They don't have as much product. Like the entire cope has always been that like, well, they're bigger companies, ooh, but like that's not really that doesn't mean that they'll be able to sell product, and that's especially true in like Microsoft's case. What we're seeing is just like a pretty severe just shift in the industry, and like we're getting to the point where like these major financial analysts, like 20 years ago, people would take Michael Pachter seriously and assume he knew what he was talking about. Like these days, he's a joke, and like there's never really been anybody to like replace him in that niche of being like the Wall Street guy who would just spurg out about Nintendo constantly and say that they were failing and say that they wouldn't move units. Like we've seen this pattern play out too many times to like ever take it seriously. And I do think that it really does need to be like known more going forward, because there was never any real basis for this idea that the Switch 2 did poorly over this holiday season. There was no real like indication that was the case. There was no real sign of that. There was no real reason to think it was true. It was something that people said because they wanted it to be true. It was something that like Nintendine tried to like meme into reality in order to benefit himself and his channel. Like it was very contrary to the actual facts. And it completely flew against like the reality of the situation, in which like the instant we get a big new Nintendo Direct with a lot of big new exciting games, that like sales are going to go way, 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 way up. It's like people just don't seem to understand that Nintendo has been doing perfectly well this year. And honestly, will probably never really struggle again. They are the video game platform now. And I just find it so ridiculous how the community tried so hard to gaslight us into thinking the Switch 2 was like failing in America. Because the way I see it, like every passing month, this thing becomes more and more popular and beloved.